Some people spend their whole lives searching for love, only to discover it was sitting beside them for a single flight. The first cry shattered the quiet cabin before the plane had even reached cruising altitude. It wasn't loud because the little girl wanted attention. It was the desperate sound of a child who had been awake far too long, clinging to the only person she trusted. Claire Bennett held 5-year-old Lily against her chest, gently rocking her while whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Her arms ached. Her eyelids felt heavier than stone. She hadn't slept for more than 3 hours in nearly 4 days, working double shifts at a small diner outside Portland before catching the overnight flight to Chicago. Every dollar in her checking account had gone toward 2 economy tickets because missing her cousin's funeral had never been an option, even if it meant returning home with almost nothing left. Around them, impatient sighs drifted through the cabin like cold wind. A businessman removed one earbud just long enough to glare before shaking his head. Across the aisle, someone muttered that children shouldn't be on red-eye flights. A young couple exchanged annoyed looks without saying a word. Claire lowered her eyes, her cheeks warming with embarrassment. She had learned that shame often arrived before kindness. She bounced Lily a little higher. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're safe. Mommy's right here." But exhaustion doesn't listen to promises. Lily buried her face into Claire's shoulder, crying harder, her tiny fingers gripping the sleeve of Claire's faded sweater until her knuckles turned pale. The flight attendant approached with a professional smile that struggled to hide concern. "Ma'am, is there anything we can do to help?" Claire forced a tired smile. "I'm trying everything." She usually falls asleep after a story, but her voice faded as tears threatened to betray her. She hated crying in front of strangers. The attendant nodded sympathetically before continuing down the aisle, leaving Claire alone with the growing weight of dozens of silent eyes. She closed hers for one brief second, praying for just 5 minutes of peace. Then a calm voice beside her quietly broke through the tension. "May I try?" Claire opened her eyes and turned toward the man sitting 1 seat away. She hadn't noticed him before. Maybe because he had spent the boarding process reading quietly instead of checking his phone like everyone else. He looked to be around 39, wearing a navy cashmere sweater beneath a tailored charcoal jacket instead of a stiff business suit. His neatly trimmed dark hair carried the first hint of silver at the temples, and his steady blue eyes held something she hadn't seen in a stranger for a very long time. Patience. There was no judgment in his expression, no irritation, only quiet understanding. Claire instinctively tightened her hold on Lily. Every lesson she'd ever learned warned her to be careful. The man seemed to recognize her hesitation immediately. "Only if you're comfortable," he said gently. "My little niece used to cry exactly like this on flights." Sometimes children just need a different heartbeat to listen to. Claire studied him for another moment. Around them, the whispers continued. Someone farther back groaned loudly. Lily's cries softened into exhausted hiccups as she buried her face deeper into Claire's shoulder. Claire looked down at her daughter, then back at the stranger whose calm never wavered. For reasons she couldn't explain, the fear inside her gave way to something else. Hope. Very carefully, she shifted Lily into his waiting arms, never imagining that this simple act of trust was about to change all 3 of their lives forever. Lily hesitated for only a heartbeat before resting against the stranger's shoulder, her small fingers still clutching the edge of Claire's sweater as though she was afraid the world might disappear if she let go completely. The man did not rush her. He simply adjusted his posture until she could hear the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. His hand moved gently across her back in calm circles, never hurried, never forced. Then, almost too quietly to notice, he began humming an old lullaby without words. It was soft enough that only Claire could hear it above the steady hum of the engines. Something extraordinary happened. Lily's trembling breaths gradually slowed. Her tiny shoulders relaxed. The desperate cries that had filled the cabin only moments earlier faded into quiet little sighs before disappearing altogether. Within less than a minute, the little girl was asleep. Claire stared in disbelief. She had spent countless nights pacing the worn hardwood floor of her small apartment, trying every lullaby she knew, every bedtime story, every gentle promise a mother could make. Yet somehow this complete stranger had brought peace with nothing more than patience. Around them, the mood inside the cabin changed almost instantly. The The passengers who had been exchanging irritated looks now returned to their books, headphones, and movies. One elderly woman across the aisle smiled warmly toward Claire before closing her eyes again. Even the flight attendant slowed as she walked past, offering an approving nod that seemed to say everything Claire needed to hear. The stranger looked down at the sleeping child with the same gentle expression, carefully brushing a loose strand of blonde hair away from Lily's forehead. She was not fighting sleep, he said quietly. She was fighting exhaustion. There is a difference. Claire swallowed hard. How did you know? He smiled without taking his eyes off Lily. Children always tell the truth. Adults are just too busy to notice. Claire felt an unexpected lump rise in her throat. Nobody had spoken to her with such kindness in months. Most conversations lately involved overdue bills, late rent notices, extra work shifts, or people reminding her how difficult life would be as a single mother. Kindness had become so rare that she almost did not recognize it anymore. "Thank you," she whispered. "You probably saved both of us tonight." He chuckled softly. "I think she saved the entire cabin." Claire laughed before she could stop herself. It was a quiet laugh, almost unfamiliar after so many difficult months. The stranger finally shifted his attention toward her. "I am Ethan." "Claire." She smiled politely. "And that little miracle is Lily. It fits her." Ethan looked back down at the sleeping child. Lilies always seem fragile, but they survive storms better than most flowers. Claire found herself studying him now that the tension had lifted. He looked successful, certainly, but there was nothing flashy about him. No oversized watch. No loud designer logos. No need to impress anyone. Everything about him felt peaceful. "Are you traveling for work?" she asked. Ethan glanced toward the dark airplane window where only their reflections remained visible against the night sky. "Something like that." It was a careful answer, one that revealed almost nothing. Claire nodded, understanding that everyone carried private burdens. She looked down at her worn sneakers and smiled apologetically. "I am sorry Lily disturbed your flight." Ethan shook his head immediately. "She reminded me that people matter more than schedules." Claire looked at him with quiet curiosity. Most travelers worried about delayed meetings, missed connections, or business calls. This man sounded different. "You do not seem stressed about tomorrow." Ethan's smile carried the faintest trace of sadness. "Tomorrow can wait. Some moments never come back." Claire followed his gaze to Lily sleeping peacefully against his shoulder, her tiny hand now resting over his heart. Neither of them noticed the passenger several rows behind quietly staring at Ethan with growing recognition, his eyes widening as if he had just realized he was sitting only a few feet away from one of the most influential business leaders in America. The cabin lights dimmed another level as the airplane crossed through the darkness above the Midwest, leaving only a soft glow above each occupied seat. Most passengers had surrendered to sleep, wrapped in travel blankets or leaning against the windows. Claire glanced around carefully before looking back at Ethan. Lily remained peacefully asleep against his shoulder, her breathing slow and even, one tiny hand still resting over his chest as though she had known him forever. Claire smiled to herself. She could not remember the last time her daughter had looked so completely at peace. "She trusts you," Claire said quietly. Ethan looked down with genuine surprise. "I think children recognize intentions before adults do." Claire considered those words for a moment. They sounded less like an opinion and more like something learned through experience. "Do you have children?" she asked softly. Ethan's smile faded almost imperceptibly before he answered. "No." The single word carried enough weight that Claire chose not to ask another question. Silence settled comfortably between them for a few moments. Outside the window, nothing could be seen except endless darkness stretching across the night sky. Claire rested her head lightly against her seat. "I used to be afraid of flying," she admitted with a quiet laugh. "Now it feels like the only place where nobody expects anything from me." Ethan turned toward her. "That sounds exhausting." Claire nodded slowly. "It is." She folded her hands together, studying the faint scratches across her wedding band, the only piece of jewelry she still wore, because it had belonged to her grandmother long before it had ever represented a marriage. Every morning starts with a schedule: breakfast, school, work, grocery store, laundry, bills. Then I tell Lily everything is going to be okay, even on the days I am not sure I believe it myself. Ethan listened without interrupting. There was no pity in his expression, only quiet attention. People always say single mothers are strong, Claire continued. Sometimes I think we are just too busy to fall apart. Ethan gave a small nod. Strength is often another word for having no choice. Claire looked at him, surprised by how perfectly he understood. Exactly. She smiled sadly. Most people only notice the moments when someone succeeds. They never see everything that almost broke them first. Ethan looked toward the dark window again, where his reflection stared back instead of the world below. Success can be lonely too. Claire tilted her head. Really? He nodded. People assume money solves every problem. It solves many, but it cannot tell you who genuinely cares about you. His voice remained calm, but Claire sensed years of quiet disappointment hidden beneath every sentence. Sometimes, he continued, you spend so much time building a career that one day you wake up surrounded by impressive things and realize you have nobody to celebrate them with. Claire lowered her eyes. That sounds lonely. Ethan smiled faintly. It is. For the first time that evening, neither of them felt like strangers. They were simply two tired people carrying different burdens that somehow weighed exactly the same. Claire glanced at Lily sleeping peacefully. She lost her father before she ever had the chance to know him, Claire said gently. He decided being a parent was not the life he wanted. Ethan looked at the little girl with quiet compassion. Then she has already learned the difference between someone who is present and someone who merely exists. Claire felt tears gathering again, but blinked them away before they could fall. You know, she whispered, tonight is the first night in months that I have not felt completely alone. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he adjusted the small blanket over Lily's shoulders with careful hands before speaking almost to himself. Sometimes one conversation with the right person can remind us that the world is still full of good people. Neither of them noticed the businessman several rows behind quietly raising his phone, zooming in on Ethan's face before freezing in disbelief. He stared at the screen, then back toward Ethan again, realizing that the quiet man holding a sleeping little girl was not an ordinary traveler at all. The wheels touched the runway just after sunrise, and a quiet round of relieved applause drifted through the cabin before passengers began reaching for their bags. Claire stretched carefully, surprised that she had managed to sleep for nearly an hour. It had been the deepest sleep she could remember in weeks. Beside her, Ethan was still holding Lily, who remained peacefully asleep with her cheek resting against his shoulder. He looked as though he had barely moved the entire flight, unwilling to disturb the little girl. Claire smiled gratefully. You did not have to hold her all this time. Ethan looked down at Lily with a gentle smile. I did not want to interrupt a beautiful dream. As the seatbelt sign switched off, Lily slowly opened her eyes. She blinked once, then looked up at Ethan without confusion or fear. Instead, she smiled. Good morning, she whispered sleepily. Ethan smiled back. Good morning, sleepyhead. Lily wrapped her little arms around his neck for one brief hug before Claire gently lifted her back into her own arms. Claire felt her heart tighten. Children did not fake affection. Thank you, she said quietly. I do not think I will ever forget your kindness. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a simple cream-colored business card. There was no large company logo across the front, only his name printed neatly with a phone number beneath it. He handed it to Claire. If you ever need professional advice or a career reference, send me an email. Claire accepted it politely without really looking. Thank you. I appreciate that. Ethan gave Lily one last smile before picking up his carry-on bag. Take good care of your mother. Lily nodded seriously. I always do. Ethan laughed softly before joining the slow line of passengers moving toward the exit. Claire watched him disappear into the jet bridge, feeling an unexpected sadness she could not explain. Some people entered your life for only a few hours, yet somehow left behind a feeling that lasted much longer. Nearly a week passed. Life quickly returned to its familiar rhythm of daycare schedules, job applications, grocery budgets, and overdue bills. Claire submitted resumes anywhere she thought might offer stable office work. She had once studied business administration before motherhood changed every plan she had made. On Friday morning, she stood outside a gleaming glass tower that stretched into the Chicago skyline. Carter Technologies. The receptionist had called 2 days earlier about an opening for an administrative coordinator. It was the first interview Claire had received in almost 3 months. She smoothed the sleeves of her modest navy blouse and looked down at Lily, who who smiled from beside Mrs. Dawson, the elderly neighbor who had kindly offered to watch her during the interview. "You are going to do great," Mrs. Dawson encouraged. Claire smiled gratefully before stepping through the revolving glass doors. The lobby was larger than her entire apartment building, filled with polished marble floors, quiet fountains, and sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. Employees moved confidently through the building carrying tablets and coffee cups, while security greeted them by name. Claire suddenly felt very small. She signed in at the reception desk and was escorted to the executive conference floor. Outside a large meeting room, she took one slow breath and reminded herself that she belonged there just as much as anyone else. The assistant opened the heavy wooden doors with a welcoming smile. "Please come in, Miss Bennett. They are ready for you." Claire stepped inside. Around the long conference table, every executive was already standing. At the far end of the room, facing the skyline through enormous windows, one familiar figure slowly turned around. Ethan. Before Claire could even process what she was seeing, every executive in the room straightened respectfully. One voice broke the silence. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. The board is ready whenever you are." Claire stood perfectly still, convinced for one impossible moment that she had walked into the wrong room. The quiet man who had patiently held Lily through an entire overnight flight was now standing at the head of a polished conference table while a dozen senior executives waited for him to begin speaking. Ethan's expression revealed only the slightest flicker of surprise before his usual calm returned. He did not smile differently. He did not pretend they had never met. He simply gave Claire the same respectful nod he had offered her on the airplane. "Good morning, Miss Bennett," he said warmly. "Thank you for coming." The simple greeting eased the tension in her shoulders. There was no trace of arrogance in his voice, no hint that he enjoyed watching her discover who he really was. Claire managed a polite smile. "Good morning." One of the executives looked curiously between them. "You have met before?" Ethan answered before Claire could speak. "We happened to be on the same flight last week." Nothing more, nothing less. He offered no dramatic explanation and certainly did not mention Lily. Claire silently appreciated that small act of discretion. The interview began exactly on schedule. Instead of asking unusual questions or treating her differently, Ethan allowed the human resources director to lead the discussion. Claire spoke honestly about her previous administrative experience, her unfinished college education, and the years she had spent balancing work while raising her daughter alone. She admitted the gaps in her resume without making excuses. When one executive asked how she handled pressure, Claire answered without rehearsed confidence. "Pressure is part of everyday life. I have learned that people do not need someone who never feels overwhelmed. They need someone who keeps showing up anyway." The room became unexpectedly quiet. Ethan did not write anything down. He simply listened. After nearly 40 minutes, the interview ended. Claire thanked everyone for their time before leaving the conference room with quiet dignity. She expected nothing. She had attended enough interviews to know that kindness did not always lead to opportunity. Later that afternoon, Ethan stood behind the glass wall of his office overlooking downtown Chicago while reviewing the interview notes. Several executives discussed qualifications, software experience, and hiring risks. Ethan listened patiently before asking one unexpected question. How did she treat the receptionist this morning? The room fell silent. Finally, the human resources director answered. She thanked her twice. Ethan nodded once. What about security? Another executive checked his notes. The security officer mentioned that Miss Bennett helped another applicant pick up a folder that had fallen across the lobby floor. Ethan remained thoughtful. And the maintenance employee cleaning the hallway? The assistant smiled slightly. She held the elevator door for him because his cart was full. Most applicants walked around him. Ethan closed the folder. Interesting. One executive frowned. With respect, those details are not part of the hiring criteria. Ethan turned calmly toward the table. Technical skills can be taught. Character usually cannot. Nobody argued after that. The following Monday, Claire arrived for her first day at Carter Technologies carrying a modest canvas tote and enough determination to build a better future for Lily. She expected to disappear quietly among hundreds of employees. Instead, she noticed something unusual before lunchtime. The janitor greeted her by name. The receptionist smiled as if they had known each other for years. Even the security officer wished her a wonderful first day. Claire assumed the company simply had an exceptional culture. She never imagined that Ethan had instructed no one to favor her. He had only asked every department to welcome each new employee with genuine respect, because he believed the way people were received on their first day often determined how they would treat others for years to come. From the window of his office several floors above, Ethan happened to see Claire pause in the lobby to help an elderly visitor understand the digital check-in screen before quietly continuing toward her own orientation meeting. She looked around first to make sure no one else was helping. Then she walked away without waiting for thanks. Ethan smiled to himself. Some people performed kindness when they believed someone important was watching. Claire Bennett seemed to practice it even when she believed no one noticed at all. Weeks quietly turned into months, and the rhythm of life inside Carter Technologies became strangely comforting for Claire. Every morning she arrived 15 minutes early with a cup of homemade coffee and a neatly organized notebook. Every afternoon she left exactly on time because Lily was always waiting at daycare with the same excited smile and the same question. "Did you have a good day, Mommy?" Claire always answered honestly. "I did." For the first time in years, that answer no longer felt like something she had to pretend. Ethan noticed the small things long before anyone else did. Claire remembered the birthdays of co-workers who thought nobody cared. She stayed a few extra minutes to help new employees understand procedures without expecting recognition. She greeted the overnight cleaning crew every morning by name because she believed every person deserved to be seen. She never tried to impress executives, yet. Somehow, everyone respected her. One Thursday afternoon, an unexpected spring storm swept across downtown Chicago, just as employees were preparing to leave. Rain poured against the windows, turning the streets into shimmering rivers of reflected city lights. Claire stood in the lobby holding Lily's small hand after picking her up from daycare, waiting for the weather to calm before walking to the train station. Lily suddenly looked toward the revolving doors, her blue eyes lighting up with excitement. "Mr. Ethan," she shouted before Claire could stop her. Ethan had just finished a meeting and was crossing the lobby with two senior executives. The moment he heard Lily's voice, the formal conversation ended without hesitation. His serious business expression disappeared, replaced by the same warm smile she remembered from the airplane. "Well, look who is here," he said as Lily happily ran toward him. Claire instinctively called after her, but Ethan had already crouched to Lily's eye level. "Have you been taking good care of your mother?" he asked. Lily nodded proudly. "Every day? I even make my own bed now." Ethan smiled. "That is very impressive." Lily reached into the tiny pocket of her yellow raincoat and carefully pulled out a folded piece of paper covered with colorful crayon drawings. "I made this for you." Ethan accepted it with both hands as though she had handed him something priceless. The drawing showed 3 smiling figures beneath a bright sun. One tall man, one little girl, one woman with long blonde hair. Above them, written in uneven letters, were the words, "Thank you for helping my mommy." Ethan looked at the picture for several quiet seconds before meeting Claire's eyes. "This might be the most valuable gift I have received all year." Claire felt her cheeks warm. "You really do not have to encourage her every masterpiece." "I disagree," Ethan replied gently. "Some gifts are measured by the heart that made them." The executives standing nearby exchanged surprised glances. They had negotiated billion-dollar contracts with Ethan Carter, yet none of them had ever seen him smile this openly. Outside, the rain continued falling in steady sheets. Across the sidewalk, Ethan looked through the glass doors before turning back toward Claire. "The train station is nearly half a mile away. May I have my driver take both of you home?" Claire hesitated. Pride had carried her through many difficult years, and accepting help never came easily. Before she could answer, Lily looked up at her with innocent hope. "Can we, Mommy? It is raining really hard." Claire looked outside again, then down at her daughter's small sneakers already damp from the short walk across the plaza. She finally nodded. "Thank you. That is very kind." During the drive, Lily chatted happily from the back seat while pointing out buildings she recognized. Ethan listened more than he spoke, asking simple questions that made her laugh without ever treating her like a child. When the car stopped outside Claire's modest apartment building, Lily leaned forward before climbing out. "Mommy smiles more now," she said with complete sincerity. Then she looked directly at Ethan. "She smiles the most when you are around." For the first time in many years, Ethan found himself speechless because sometimes the smallest voice revealed the biggest truth. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the trees outside Carter Technologies in shades of amber and gold. Claire settled naturally into her new life, never imagining how much it had changed since the night she met Ethan on that airplane. They still crossed paths during the workday, sometimes only exchanging a smile in the hallway, sometimes sharing a brief conversation after meetings. Ethan remained careful never to give her special treatment. If anything, he expected the same professionalism from Claire that he expected from everyone else. She respected him for that. The friendship between Ethan and Lily, however, grew effortlessly. Every few weeks, when Ethan happened to leave the office as Claire was picking up Lily from the reception area, the little girl would happily wave one of her newest drawings in the air. Ethan always stopped, no matter how busy his schedule appeared to be. He admired every picture as though it belonged in an art gallery, asking thoughtful questions about every tree, every cloud, every smiling face she colored with oversized crayons. Claire often watched those conversations from a distance, quietly wondering how someone carrying the weight of an entire corporation could make one little girl feel like she was the most important person in the world. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Claire was organizing archived contracts in the executive records room when she noticed a personnel file resting inside an open folder on a nearby desk. She had no intention of reading it. She simply meant to return it to the administrative office before someone misplaced confidential documents. As she lifted the folder, a familiar name caught her eye. Claire Bennett. Confused, she froze. Attached to the file were copies of her employment history, references, public court records related to Lily's custody, rental history, and even a background investigation completed before her hiring date. Her heart sank. She slowly turned another page and found a handwritten note from the security department confirming observations made during her first week inside the company. Claire felt the warmth disappear from her face. The memories of the airplane, the kindness, the job offer, every encouraging conversation suddenly collided inside her mind. Had none of it been genuine? At that exact moment, two senior managers walked past the open doorway, unaware that Claire could hear them. The chief executive officer has always been thorough, one of them remarked casually. He researches everyone before making important decisions. The other nodded. Especially people he personally takes an interest in. Their footsteps faded down the hallway, but the words remained. Claire quietly closed the folder, carefully returning every page exactly where she had found it. Her hands trembled. She understood why companies performed employment screenings. That was normal, but this felt different. Personal. She remembered every conversation she had shared with Ethan, every moment she had believed he simply saw her as a person instead of a project to evaluate. The thought hurt more than she expected. That evening, Ethan left a leadership meeting and noticed Claire's office. Lights were already off, something that had never happened before. He checked with her supervisor, who looked equally surprised. She said she was not feeling well and went home early. Ethan frowned slightly. The next morning, Claire arrived before sunrise. She quietly placed a neatly typed resignation letter inside the Human Resources Director's inbox, cleared the few personal belongings from her desk, and left behind the framed crayon drawing Lily had once insisted she display at work. She did not ask for a farewell gathering. She did not explain herself to anyone. She simply walked through the lobby with the same quiet dignity she had carried since her first day. When Ethan arrived an hour later, the receptionist handed him a single white envelope. He recognized Claire's handwriting immediately. As he read the first sentence, the color slowly drained from his face. Outside, beyond the glass entrance, Claire disappeared into the morning crowd without looking back, believing that the greatest disappointment was not discovering that someone powerful had investigated her past, but realizing she had trusted him enough to think he never would. Ethan read Claire's resignation letter 3 times before setting it down on his desk. It was only a single page, written with the same grace and honesty that had always defined her. She thanked the company for the opportunity, expressed appreciation for every colleague she had met, and wished everyone continued success. There was only one sentence that truly mattered. Trust is difficult to earn and impossible to rebuild once it feels examined instead of believed. Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the man who negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without hesitation found himself unable to answer a single handwritten page. He immediately called the director of human resources. Bring me every document connected to Claire Bennett's hiring process. Within minutes, the complete file rested on his desk. Ethan turned each page carefully until he found the investigation Claire had seen. His expression hardened with confusion. He had authorized only the company's standard employment verification, the same. Routine background screening completed for every employee entering a position with access to confidential information. The additional personal report had been ordered separately by the Corporate Risk Management Department after someone recognized Claire as the woman who had unexpectedly become close to the chief executive officer. They believed they were protecting him. They had never informed him. Ethan quietly placed the report aside. Who approved this? The room fell silent before the chief legal officer finally answered. It was done out of caution. We believed it was in the company's best interest. Ethan looked around the conference table with calm disappointment. The company's best interest should never come at the cost of another person's dignity. Nobody spoke. A major investor presentation was scheduled to begin in less than 30 minutes. More than 200 shareholders had already arrived from across the country. Ethan looked at the presentation folder waiting beside him, then gently pushed it away. Reschedule the meeting. Every executive stared at him in disbelief. Sir, this presentation has been planned for months. Ethan stood, buttoning his jacket. Businesses recover from delayed meetings. Broken trust is far more expensive. Without another word, he walked out of the boardroom, leaving an entire schedule behind for the first time in his career. Finding Claire proved much harder than he expected. She had already accepted temporary work at a neighborhood community center while searching for another permanent position. Her phone went directly to voicemail. Her apartment manager politely explained that she had left early that morning with Lily for the weekend harvest festival held at a small public park nearly 30 miles outside the city. Ethan drove there himself. The afternoon sun cast warm golden light across rows of maple trees as families wandered between food stands, pumpkin displays, and children laughing beneath strings of colorful flags. Ethan searched patiently through the crowd until he finally saw Lily sitting at a picnic table decorating a small pumpkin with bright markers, while Claire helped another child whose paintbrush had rolled onto the grass. She was no longer an employee. She simply remained herself, offering kindness without expecting recognition. Ethan stopped several feet away, waiting until Claire noticed him. Her smile faded into quiet surprise. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. I did not come here as your former employer. Claire remained calm. Then why did you come? He looked directly into her eyes with complete honesty. To apologize for something I should have protected you from. Claire searched his face, trying to decide whether to believe him. Ethan slowly held out the investigation report, now stamped across every page with one bold word in red ink. Void. I never asked for this, he said softly. I should have known it existed. I should have made sure no one believed they had the right to examine your life simply because they wanted to protect mine. They failed you. But so did I, because leadership means accepting responsibility even for mistakes you did not personally make. Claire looked down at the marked report before meeting his eyes again. For the first time since leaving Carter Technologies, she saw not the powerful chief executive officer standing before her, but the same quiet man who had once held a frightened little girl through a long night flight, because compassion had mattered more than convenience. Claire lowered her eyes to the report one last time before quietly folding it closed and handing it back to Ethan. The autumn breeze carried a handful of golden leaves across the park, while children laughed somewhere behind them, completely unaware that two adults were standing at the edge of a conversation that would change both of their lives. You cannot erase what happened, Claire said gently. I know, Ethan replied without hesitation. I came because I wanted you to know the truth, not because I expected forgiveness. Claire studied his face carefully. The confidence she had always associated with successful people was still there, but something else had replaced the distance she once imagined surrounded him. Humility. The willingness to admit failure without searching for excuses. Before she could answer, a small pair of footsteps came racing toward them. Lily wrapped her arms around Ethan's waist with the same joyful certainty she had shown on the airplane months earlier. You came, she exclaimed. Ethan smiled as he knelt beside her. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to make something right, I would not let fear stop me. Lily reached into the pocket of her little jacket and carefully pulled out a tiny acorn she had collected that afternoon. She placed it in Ethan's hand as though she were giving away the greatest treasure in the world. "This is for you," she said proudly. "My teacher says little things can grow into big things." Ethan looked at the acorn resting in his palm before smiling through eyes that had quietly filled with emotion. "Your teacher sounds very wise." Claire watched the simple exchange and realized something she had been trying to deny ever since leaving Carter Technologies. Ethan had never earned Lily's trust with expensive gifts, promises, or attention. He had earned it through consistency, by listening, by showing up, by treating one little girl with the same respect he gave every adult he met. Weeks later, after many honest conversations and slow rebuilding, Claire accepted Ethan's invitation to return to Carter Technologies, not because he asked her to, but because he had changed the company's policies himself. Every enhanced personal investigation beyond standard employment screening now required written approval from the individual involved. Respect had become part of the company culture, not merely a slogan displayed in the lobby. Claire did not return to her old position. She accepted a new role leading employee wellness and community outreach, helping create programs that supported working parents, caregivers, and families facing difficult seasons of life. Ethan attended every planning meeting, never as someone seeking praise, but as someone still learning. Their friendship continued to grow quietly, without grand declarations or dramatic promises. On Saturday mornings, Ethan often joined Claire and Lily for breakfast at a small neighborhood diner where nobody cared about stock prices or board meetings. Lily insisted on ordering blueberry pancakes every single time, and Ethan always pretended to be surprised when she finished every bite. One bright spring morning, nearly a year after that unforgettable flight, the three of them walked together through a neighborhood park where new flowers had begun to bloom beneath tall oak trees. Lily skipped several steps ahead before suddenly turning around with the innocent confidence only a child could possess. She smiled at Ethan and reached for his hand. "Can I call you Dad someday?" The world seemed to pause. Ethan looked first at Lily, then at Claire. Claire smiled softly, tears shining in her eyes as she gave the smallest nod. Ethan knelt beside Lily, gently taking her little hand into both of his. "You can call me whatever makes your heart feel safe," he whispered. Lily threw her arms around him without another word. Claire joined them a moment later, and for the first time in many years, none of them felt incomplete. Ethan had spent decades building one of the most successful companies in America, believing success could be measured in buildings, profits, and headlines. Yet standing beneath the morning sun with a grateful woman beside him and a laughing little girl holding his hand, he finally understood that the richest people are not the ones who own the most. They are the ones who become someone's safe place when the world feels uncertain.